By the way, this is a textbook's explanation, authentication and authorization. But in the real world, things get complicated than this. It is not simple as authentication and authorization. This is what you need to clearly identify before you implement. Hello guys, welcome back to another tech video on my channel. Today's topic is a little bit different, but this is one of the most useful topic when we implementing microservices on a real world or any architecture on a real world, because we are going to talk about how we can implement security on an enterprise level architecture, especially on the microservices. This enterprise level word is very important. Why? Because if you remember, if you watch, we discussed security little bit in detail on one of our microservice video, right? So we did a course about microservices, and there we we allocated few episodes for discuss about the security and the security implementation, right? But today we are going to go little more deeper into that spectrum and also discuss about some new technologies and frameworks and some tools out there to help us. Okay, so before going to there, make sure you subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed yet, and also make sure you share this channel on your social media so we can find more people who are interested on these topics. What is security? Security is something we must implement every system what we develop. Doesn't matter whether it's a microservice or monolithic or what, we must implement the security. Now the problem is how we implement this. Usually in the microservice world, O2 is kind of a dominating this security chapter on this microservices platform. Not only microservices, almost all internet-based or enterprise level architecture, O2 is kind of a dominating this paradigm. But we are not going to talk deeper about the OAuth. Why? Because if you remember, if you go there, you can find my video where we discuss about OAuth tools and OAuth actors and how those talk to each other and everything, right? So we are going to go to the next step today, not about OAuth 2. So if you remember, in our last video, we implemented our own OAuth 2 server. Right? We implement own OAuth 2 server, and we got users created, and we connected our microservices, and we authenticate and authorize through our OAuth server. But when you're implementing application in a real world, in a real enterprise architectures, you don't have a luxury to create users on your own server. Because just think, you may be developing a system or designing a system to somewhere where organization has already 1,000 users, right? So they already have access management solution. They already have a IDP or else identity provider for that, right? So you cannot create all those users on your system. Let's say you can say, hey, I have a system. Doesn't matter you have 1,000 users. Please go ahead and create on those users on my system. That doesn't work like that. So they will tell you, hey, you can create your system, but users should validate through our existing IDP or identity provider. They may use LDAP, they may use Active Directory, or they may use Azure AD, it's some other version of Active Directory, or Kerberos. So whatever the identity management solution they have, you need to cooperate with them and validate users with them, right? This is the kind of almost every time the situation we face. I mean, a very edge case, you get opportunity to create your own users on your own OAuth server. Why? Because if you think a user's perspective, right, then they usually log into their system to check emails and all other corporate applications. Then they have to re-log into your application, which is again part of your corporate. So it doesn't make any sense, right? Why they have to maintain two different accounts for same organization for two different apps? So we call this single sign-on, SSO, right? How this works, once you sign on to a particular system, this claim or this sign-on tokens can be shared within all the application where they can define a trust, right? So usually 99% time you get this requirement. So it's better to go there. Now how we can do that? The previous solution what we had on our microservice course was implementing our own custom auth server, right? So even now, even for this case, implementing your auth server is fine. You can do that. But the problem is, if you have out-of-the-box solutions, why you want to burn your hand? Number two, when you do implement your own solution, you need to take care of the security of that solution, plus the bugs and all those issues can raise, and you have to test that. Plus, if you need a new requirement, you need to implement it again. For example, in our auth tutorial video, we just implemented our auth servers and we created users over there, right? But in the real world, as I explained, you may need to authenticate users from some other identity provider. Then you have to implement this feature to your auth server. Why you want to burn your hand? Let's see what are the available solutions for this. One solution is Keycloak. Keycloak is an open source project initiated by JBoss, and now in 2014 they released first version. Now it's a very stable identity and access management solution out there, which is open source and heavily used, and there is good community support, and personally I also prefer and I use that. That's one solution. The other solution is, if you're on AWS, you can use Cognito. Cognito also full-fledged solution. You can customize. It has a triggers like a pre-token generation and all those things, right? It's a very customizable solution, but I'm not going to explain in deeper. You can do that too. If you don't want to use a cloud-based solution, or if you don't want to stick into particular cloud, you can use something like WSO2 IS. So WSO2 is again a company founded in Sri Lanka, where they develop a lot of open source service stack like ESB, identity servers, message brokers, and so many tools are out there on the WSO2 umbrella. So you can use something like that. Or if you don't want to use a Keycloak, if you don't want to use a Cognito, if you don't want to use a WSO2, then you can use something like Ore. And there are plenty of tools out there. Ore, Hydra also, it's a nice identity management platform. So all of these commonly share OAuth2. Right? They all facilitate to run OAuth2 based authorization and authentication. For authentication, they can use OpenID, OIDC, OpenID Connect protocols, and it's a full-fledged solution no matter what you use. So now we need to, before we choose a particular tool or a framework, we need to see what we are going to do, what we need to be done as authentication and authorization implementation. So in this journey, you need to clearly understand two words. One is authentication, other one is authorization. These are very two different, though it looks like similar. Authentication means who you are. That is the way we validate user against the password, right? So to identify who is this person. And then second part is authorization. That tells what user can do, right? By the way, this is a textbook's explanation, authentication and authorization. But in the real world, things get complicated than this. It is not simple as authentication and authorization. So think like this. So I'll take two different scenarios to explain this. Number one, let's say you create a solution for a corporate organization. There we have multiple departments, right? So particular user is authorized to read employee profile, right? That means user has authorization, user authorized to read employee's profile, right? That means what user can do. Now, there is a rule, there's a policy saying user can only read a department which is assigned to that particular user. Right? That means though he has a feature, though he has access right, though he authorized to read employee's profile, he cannot read all the employees' profile. So he only can read employees' profiles in a particular department. So that means authorization has two parts. This is what you need to clearly identify before you implement. Authorization means in general, yes, what you can do, but it has two parts. What you can do, that's number one. Number two, you can do that on what? That's very important, right? If you fit it to our example, what you can do, you can read users profile. You can do that on what? You can read user profiles on what? Which objects, which departments they belongs to, which department they has access to read users profile. That part is very important. That's a simple one. Let's say a little complicated one. Let's say you are implementing some support ticket management solution, right? So there, the support engineer can read user's profile only if the particular user's support ticket is assigned to this particular support engineer, right? So that means support engineer has profile read access, but support engineer cannot read any profile he want. He only can read profiles if particular user's support ticket is assigned to him. So with these two examples, you understand there can be simple scenarios as well as there can be some complicated scenarios. So, but the problem is how we can implement this. So what user can do is straightforward, but user can do that on which object is the where you get little bit trouble with this little bit dynamic and complicated, right? So therefore we usually say this is our capabilities, or we can say these are users policies, right? So implementing these type of policies with the authorization server is little bit hard to do and hard to maintain. You can implement that, but it's hard to maintain. So usually we have a different strategies like RBAC and so and so. RBAC means the role-based access control, and there are multiple strategies to control access, and also there are certain keywords involved here: PIP, PDP, PEP. There are so many concepts behind this, but I'm not going to cover everything in this video, right? So I'm going to kind of lay the foundation so you can build your thing on top of that. So how we usually do this, we create users and we create roles, right? So now what we do is, let's say you create a user management solution, user management service. So then you need to determine what this user management service can do. It can read users, it can write users, it can edit users, it can delete users, and also it can list users. Read and list is two different permissions in general. Read means you give the particular user ID and fetch that user information. List means you can fetch all the users as a list, right? So let's say you have these 5 permissions, right? Read, list, create, update, delete. Now you create these permissions under the app, right? Now you assign these permissions to a particular role, and you assign role to particular user, right? So that means if a user belongs to particular role, then we can see what are the permissions belongs to that role and apply that. Okay, so now that part is done. Now how this works? So user usually log into their UI, right? When they log into the UI redirect to our authentication server or identity provider, whatever we call that. So let's say in our example we use Keycloak, right? So because don't try to implement your own authorization server, rather than just use something like a Keycloak, because it's a standard, you have enough community support, it's open source and everything is there. So now when you implement the Keycloak, now user redirect to Keycloak, right? So now Keycloak, let's assume for now Keycloak somehow authenticate, right? We can go there to discuss that. Somehow authenticate the users. Now this token come back to UI. So now UI submitting this token with every service request. So now when the service request comes, let's say API gateway says, okay, this user is trying to read user, right? This particular user is trying to let's say create new user, right? So now it says, does this token carrying create user permission, right? If it carrying create user permission, what it does, it like let the traffic to flow in. But now the problem is the second part. User can do this on what? That means under which department this user can create new users. Okay. So when you go there, you have to validate that. We usually don't take this into or this also into the Keycloak or any other authentication service. Rather, we take this into separate thing called policy management solution. And we can use something like OPA. OPA is Open Policy Agent, and OPA is a kind of a very famous tool out there to do this. OPA is simple and scalable, and OPA is virtually you can put on anything. You can put on SSH, you can put on any telnet, REST services. What you want to protect, you can use OPA. Okay. So how OPA works now, as we discussed, user has a create user permission, so therefore it flowing. So now when just before it create, we talk to OPA and ask, hey, this user is going to create a new user on the department 1, D001. Is this allowed? Right? So OPA validate user's roles, permission and the capabilities against the what user going to do. And then OPA says true or false. Right? Based on that PDP, based on that policy decision, now we can say no, you cannot create that. The response you can say as a forbidden, or you can say the 200 or whatever the response, depend on that. Okay, that's our first scenario. The second scenario, let's say what we discussed, support engineer is now going to read user's profile, right? So the support engineer belongs to a role where that role has a permission to read user profile, right? So when the request comes, API gateway allow the request to flow into your service because he has user read permission. So now you talk to OPA and ask, does this support engineer has a ticket allocated from this particular user what he is trying to read the profile? If it is yes, the OPA will tell true. If it is no, OPA will tell false, right? OPA is a very dynamic. Actually, OPA doesn't know whether he's going to deny the access or allow the access. It depends on the rules how you're writing, right? I'm not going to talk about how you're writing OPA rules or how you put in this access control in place in this video, but I'm going to try to lay the foundation. Okay, so now we know how to do the what you can do and how to manage what you can do on what, right? You can do on what, right? Sorry about the confusion. Now the problem is this authorization. How you can do the authentication? As I explained before, we don't have a luxury to validate our own users, right? So we need to talk to probably a remote server, LDAP or AD or a Kerberos or whatever they have implemented by the organization. So we have two mechanisms for that. One is identity brokering. Identity brokering means you can implement like a social login, even Google, Facebook, Apple, right? Login with Apple, login with Google. So what user will do is you go there, right? So now you are redirecting to sign-in page. So sign-in page will show you sign in with something. So let's say sign with Active Directory, sign in with Google or something like that, right? When that happens, you click that, it will redirect to your identity provider and give the username and password, and it give you a token back to Keycloak if it's a Keycloak, right? So now Keycloak can generate its own token with the particular user roles and everything, a JW token, and give it back to. This is called identity brokering. There's a second technique we can use called identity federation. Identity federation means Keycloak can validate users against multiple data sources. It can probably from a LDAP server, probably Kerberos, or they have a custom adapter. If you have your users on the MySQL database or somewhere, right? So Keycloak can talk to that particular data store and validate the users as well, right? So you can like customize it. Doesn't matter where your users is. You can teach Keycloak how you can validate these users, right? So this is a fully customizable solution because it's implemented using Java, right? So now we know authentication also. How we can do that? Either Keycloak can carry their user, Either they can talk to identity brokering using a SAML or OpenID Connect, or they can use identity federation using like LDAP or any other external identity providers. So when you put all these things together, you can build nice authentication and authorization solution for your application. So, but nice thing is, let's say you put a Keycloak in front of your all the microservices. Now Keycloak talk to Active Directory, right? Or Azure AD or whatever your organization has, probably LDAP, right? So now what happens is, okay, taken on LDAP, Active Directory, Kerberos, all those things kind of go with similar fashion. Active Directory use LDAP or Kerberos to implement Active Directory authentication mechanisms, and it's kind of a little complicated process. Just think those as a separate entities, right? So don't get confused unless you are like a Windows admin or some Microsoft admin or something like that. Don't worry about that. Just think those are separate entities, because LDAP can exist without AD, and also Kerberos can exist without Active Directory, but Active Directory also can use them. It's little complicated to understand. So now, so when you do that, let's say you have Active Directory implemented and you configured Keycloak to either identity brokering or either identity federation to the your Active Directory. So now when the user already logged in to Active Directory to check email or something like that, if they come to your application, your UI, it go to Keycloak, Keycloak talk to Active Directory, Active Directory tell, hey, this user is already signed in, right? And issue the claim and whatever the trust to the Keycloak, and Keycloak generate the token and seamlessly give it to UI. So that means user don't need to sign in a second time to access your application, which we call SSO, also known as single sign-on. So we discussed a lot within a short time. I just wanted to teach these words and what it means, and in the simplest possible way. If it is confused and if it is not clear enough, watch this again. I'm sure then you will understand. If you want to go deeper and see how we implement this practically, how to implement, what are the practices, how we really write these OPA policies and all, just comment below or send me a message to my Facebook page, and then I'll try to create some videos for you to explain these separate pieces in separate videos. Then stay safe, take care, make sure you subscribe and follow Facebook and Instagram as well.